This week we were looking at a gendered approach to security. Most people immediately go towards a feminist approach, and fair enough, because we do know statistically women are disproportionately impacted often by things like war and conflict, and of course we all know a lot now about rape in war, and that this is disproportionately women. However, I just want to make a couple of points here. When it comes to a gendered approach, it's talking about a social classification, not a biological classification. So firstly, this is how people define themselves, and it could also be boys, girls, women, men, or sexual minority groups, for example, same-sex groups, and it's a social classification in the case of it's how that particular gender is treated in the social context in that particular community and how this impacts them. So a gendered approach does not limit you to looking at just, for example, issues that impact women, even though you will get plenty of examples from that. So that's one thing I want to say. And the second thing is that this is the first critical theory that we're really looking at, where we start to see what it means to take a critical lens or to take a certain type of theoretical lens and approach a security issue. So just as an example, and you've already had some great examples on the discussion board, but just something else I want to do just to give the other side, I suppose, is I put a 10-minute video up this week already. I recommend you have a good look at it. It's got some really good examples on there. I was reading an article recently in The Guardian, actually, about the rape of men as a war crime, very specifically in Libya. And one of the reasons for it was not only as a sexual crime, but it was actually a form of psychological torture, and also a case of stigmatizing men in their own community, because in that particular Arabic society, it was so taboo that for some people it ripped apart, in fact, entire families. The fact that rapes had even happened in communities of men against men. So, this is one case of how very specific gender violence happens, and it's really targeting a particular gender group. Also, the implications of that is this is a war crime in its own right. And also when you look at peace and how security is again achieved or reinstated, you have to look at how you manage whole communities that might have been subject to that kind of violence. So that's just another example. Now, if you want to contrast how you might look at, say, the situation of rape and war against women or men, in the case I just gave you of Libya, but let's say Kosovo, wherever it might be, parts of Africa where there's been high rates of rape against women. If you were to instead take a traditional security approach, you're going to be asking questions such as, what are the spillover effects of that conflict? Or what countries are involved, who aligns with who, and how does that affect my interests? So when I worked in Australian foreign policy, the first thing they consider when they look at any conflict over the other side of the world is, why am I involved? Why would I be involved? How does it impact my alliances? So that would be a traditional security approach. So you can see that locks out an entire range of issues. Now, at the other extreme, traditional security approach might look at really gross human rights abuses and have an awareness of them. I mean, ethnic conflict in Syria is a case, and say that actually has nothing to do with us as a nation state, because we're all sovereign nations. It's up to Libya to sort out its own internal problems. It's up to Kosovo, whoever, to sort out its own internal problems. It has nothing to do with me. So we see that is the limitation of a traditional security approach. So if you're going to start to look at specific impacts of war, for example, or security against certain gendered bodies or communities, a traditional security approach is not going to work for you. So this is where a critical security approach will start to work, and this is where, if you wanted to take a gendered theory, or if you wanted to take a gendered lens to look at that, you're going to look at very specific impacts of war, usually civil war situations. So I hope you start to understand what it means to use a different approach and what the differences are. So no approach is designed to study everything. So it's going to affect what you notice and what issues you give attention to.